All right, so it's 8 o'clock. You all ready to get started?
We are.
We have a good showing in the room, including my classmate Sean Barney, which is awesome. Hey, Sean.
Hi, Sean.
And folks are still joining, so I'll talk slowly for the introduction. Welcome to our virtual seminar. We are so delighted to have Professor Nackenoff with us. This is our third seminar, but really our first official one with a wide distribution list. So we've worked out the kinks in prior sessions and are thrilled to be here just a couple of weeks before the election to talk about the election and polarization in America. I just learned that Professor Nackenoff got to Swarthmore in 1992. Which was just a couple of years before I took American politics with her. And one thing I just realized the other day is that you may not know this, but yours was the only class I took with my future wife, Rachel Henning, in 97. And Sean Barney was in that class too, so we've got most of the team here together. So anyway, we'll turn it over to you in just a minute, Carol, but before we do that, I just wanted to talk about the Q&A aspect of all of this. So for that, I'm going to share my screen and show you a screenshot from earlier today. This is our friend Amanda. You can all see that, right? You can see Amanda smiling at you?
Yep.
Okay, good. So if you would like to just type a question, which I will then ask on your behalf, click the Q&A button right there, and then it will appear and I'll ask it. If you would like to actually talk in real time, raise your hand and we will see that and we'll make you live and then you can interact and ask in real time. And if you would just like to chit chat, which won't be that fun because nobody will really be looking, you can type the chat button. But that's it. And so let me turn it over to Carol and take it away.
Cool. Well, thanks everybody for giving up other things, whether it's football, baseball playoffs, or whatever. To be here tonight. I am teaching American elections this fall. I only do it once every 4 years. And some of the reading that I gave you is going to be coming up in my class later next week and then the beginning of the following week. Actually, we have a Swarthmore alum, Andy Perrin, coming to speak on Monday. He is a sociologist at the University of North Carolina. And this is a joint invitation with SocAnth, and he's going to be talking about culture representation and the election on campus on Monday. So my students will be going to that. I've been on the road talking about the election. I just got back from Flagstaff, Arizona, where I was invited by a Swarthmore alum, Maya Jaskowski, and her husband, John Kaltenstein, and a former student of mine from Rutgers. So I gave a talk at Northern Arizona earlier this week. And that's a more general talk about what's going on in 2016, which you may want to talk about during question and answer. I'm going to talk about one aspect of that tonight, and that is political polarization in the United States, for which there are so many competing hypotheses and explanations. I don't think I could get through them in a whole semester if I tried. I just shared the American Political Science Association's committee on for best paper given at last year's convention, and we split the award between two people, both of whom wrote about polarization, but in very different ways. One of them did a comparative study of Germany, Spain, and the United States, and found that people who use Twitter and Facebook and are in groups that are not expressly political, but where they're exposed to political conversation, tend to moderate their views in the ways that we would expect. That was a really interesting paper. And then another one finds that polarization increases with economic inequality. And it seems to be a kind of a vicious cycle. So those are just a couple of the things that my students are going to be exposed to over the next few weeks. But the question that I would like to start with tonight, and we don't have to stick with this when we get to Q&A if you don't want to, is what should we say about the deepening political polarization in contemporary American politics and its impact on the 2016 election. We certainly know and have known for a while that Congress is polarized. I want to try to show you something that is really a stunning set of images. I'll explain it in a second. This is that good? Higher? Good? Up a little? Okay. Polarization in Congress, and this is roll call votes in Congress, and it is agreements between pairs of the same party and pairs of cross-party members of Congress. So you're basically looking at the divergence of agreement rates over time. Up here, which is 1949, the blues and the reds are going to look pretty blurry because the parties overlap a lot. But as you go through time, you start to see them diverging like cell dividing. And by the time, can you see the bottom row?
Go up just a little bit. Yeah, there we got it.
I thought about trying this on PowerPoint, but figured I'd just try this. When you see the bottom row, look how clearly the blues and the reds are separated. So there's almost no cross-party voting in Congress by, this is 2011 is where it ends here. So there's another way of showing this that I think you'll see more readily. This is, again, using vote view data from the 93rd Congress in 1973-74 to the 112th Congress, 2011-2012. And it's okay to stop with 2011-12 because this is the first year that there's really a big separation and no overlap between Republicans and Democrats in either the House or the Senate. So what that means is the most conservative Democrat is still to the left of the most liberal Republican in terms of roll call voting in the House and the Senate. So these images show just how much Congress has polarized in recent years. So similar voting between Democrats and Republicans, or sometimes what we call bipartisanship, was fairly common through the 1980s. But starting in the 1990s, the parties began to pull apart like a single cell dividing in two. And so we have a lot of polarization among elites. Is this a terrible thing or no? Well, when political scientists back in the 50s complained about Tweedledum and Tweedledee parties, they said in a book called Toward a More Responsible Two-Party System that they wanted America to build a more responsible two-party system, sort of like a parliamentary system where the opposition party formulates its own programmatic ideas and functions like a government in governing party in exile. So we sort of get that with polarization. The parties are supposed to work by organizing issues into a manageable narrative and set of choices for the voters. And with polarization, unlike before, voters can tell the difference between Republicans and Democrats on a wide variety of issues. Some people say that that's necessary for voters to make intelligent choices. So what has happened is that voters confronted with parties with clearer differences sort themselves accordingly. Now, polarization has a lot of causes, as I said, but it also means sharper divisions, not just in Congress, but among the electorate. Moderates have disappeared from the Republican Party. That started as early as the late 1960s, after the Voting Rights Act and the Civil Rights Act. The parties began to change, and moderate Republicans from the Northeast, think people like Lincoln Chafee, think like Chuck Percy, and from the Midwest and Upper Midwest, basically become extinct, and the Republican Party then absorbs the folks who had been Southern Democrats. And so as the South became more Republican, in reaction in part to the civil rights advances of the Johnson administration, the Democratic Party was able to become more liberal because they lost the more socially conservative and racially conservative Southern Dems, and the Republican Party became more conservative. That's the basis, that's the start of polarization of the parties. And so what we know, though, is that the Republicans moved further in a conservative direction than the Democrats did in a liberal direction, especially in recent years. So, for example, the Koch brothers and their network of donors push party elites who want their votes, push them to take more dramatic positions on anti-regulation, for example, especially of what we call dirty industries, coal, natural gas, oil, but sort of anti-government, anti-regulation stances. Mitt Romney changed his position on climate change in his search for donors in 2012. So that's part of the reason that candidates and elected officials have moved to the right in the Republican Party. The Tea Party is another, where they have been able to punish Republican incumbents who don't vote the way they want on particular issues. They don't necessarily, they may, by punishing an incumbent, end up getting a Democrat in that seat, but sometimes they got instead a more conservative Republican who was more willing to vote the way they wanted to vote. So the Republican Party has certainly moved further to the right in recent years. So the parties have become vehemently adversarial, and it has become extremely difficult for majorities to act. And polarization contributes to the public sense that the parties are just dysfunctional, that government is dysfunctional, that parties don't work. Bipartisanship is rare, obstructionism becomes a way of governing, and polarization probably affects the level of trust in government and in Congress and other American institutions. Those levels of trust, with the possible exception of the court, which hasn't fallen as much as the others, is just in the toilet for Congress and the presidency. It's in the single digits for Congress, for example. So we've got a lot of angry and frustrated voters, and I'll talk a little bit more about some of the sources of polarization as I talk about climate change and talk about the other readings that we did for today. So one of the things that we see is this growing party divide on climate change. Differences between the Democrats and Republicans over things like whether global warming exists, whether it has already begun, whether changes are caused by humans, whether scientists agree, whether they think they're going to experience the effects of global warming in their lifetimes. And looking at Gallup data over time, starting in about 1998, I think, Basso and Guber, who my students read in a different course, find that among those who say they understand the issue of climate change either fairly well or well, the partisan divide is actually grew wider, while among those who say they know very little, the partisan divide is fairly stable. Now, this is a puzzling finding. I should point out that when you look behind people saying they understand climate change a lot or somewhat, they often don't. But in a survey, you're sort of stuck with the questions that we have. And so we have to take, for the moment, at face value that they do understand something about the issue when they say they do. But we're not completely stuck with that, because we also find this same very weird finding when we look at education levels. So Democrats with a college degree were far more likely than their less well-educated Democratic counterparts to say that global warming was the result of human activity. Now, that doesn't surprise us. But what happens when you turn to the Republicans? On the Republican side, college-educated Republicans were less likely than their less well-educated Republican counterparts to say global warming was the result of human activity. The more education you had, the less were you likely to believe that global warming existed or was the result of human activity. So, one of the things I always sort of nod when my students always tell me that the solution to everything is more education, you've got to scratch your head here. Education is not the answer. That is, you could say that education or knowledge about the issue actually that party specifies the relationship between education and beliefs about climate change, which is always an interesting finding. So for the Democrats, it's positive. For the Republicans, it's either flat or negative. This we'll come back to a little bit. Where's this coming from? Are people taking their cues from elites they trust most? Are the more educated, if they're Republican, watching more Fox News and the less educated watching football? I don't know. I don't think any of us know. Are the elite, are more educated people more attuned to elite discourse? And are they getting it from that? I don't know. But what politicized climate change so much? Because it didn't used to be. Given the time of the growing gap between Democrats and Republicans on climate change, there's some people who say, well, it's things like Al Gore, An Inconvenient Truth, which came out in 2007, and I suspect most of you have seen that movie, and that while that really put climate change on the agenda, it also at the same time started to polarize people because Al Gore had been a Democratic senator and a Democratic vice president. And so you've got a political figure associated with one party who is delivering the bad news about climate change. And so it may be that people simply reacted against that. But I think that's too simple, because if you combine this with the Tesla readings and other things we know, there may be other explanations. So maybe we can get some of those. Let me point out, and if I talk too long, stop me. I want to talk a little bit about a Pew study on partisanship and political animosity in 2016. This was published on June 22nd. Now, and not before, majorities in both parties express very unfavorable political views about the other party. Among those who report voting and either volunteering or donating money to campaigns, 70% of Democrats and 62% of Republicans say they were afraid of the other party, afraid, angry, and frustrated. On feelings thermometers, where you have from 0 to 100, 0 is really cold and 100 is really warm, have a warm spot in your heart. When they're asked to rate a number of groups, Republicans and Democrats give very low ratings to people in the opposing party. So the lowest ratings, 31% by Democrats, 29% by Republicans. They give them, the feeling the thermometer registers 31 degrees for Democrats and 29 by Republicans for members of the opposing party. And they have gotten colder, especially since 1976. So what we know is that it's the growth of people who say they have really cold feelings that is pulling down these ratings. Trump and Hillary, by the way, sit at 11 and 12% on the other party's thermometer. So they're rated even lower than the average voter. So this mutual contempt has grown even since Pew did their 2014 study. In 2016, 45% of Republicans would go so far as to say that the Democratic Party's policies are so misguided that they threaten the nation's well-being, and that's up from 37% in 2014. 41% of Democrats say the same about the Republican Party, and that's up 10% since 2014. The views of a president from the opposition party have also grown considerably more critical and negative over time. Many Republicans and Democrats say that members of the other party are closed-minded. Majorities of both parties say that. They say they are immoral. They say they're dishonest. And Republicans add lazy at 46%. And I have to think that that's a coded race response. And about a third of each party says that the other party members are unintelligent. So they view other party adherents with suspicion and hostility, and see as an important goal keeping the other party from governing, from power. This certainly helps us explain congressional behavior. With the Democrats in the White House the last 8 years, a good deal of congressional attention has been devoted to preventing legislative action on anything Obama wanted. The 113th Congress was the second lowest in passing legislation in recent history, and the 112th, which was 2011-12, was the least productive. So if significant numbers of one party believes the other is dangerous to the nation, why would they confirm a Democratic president's choice for the Supreme Court? Wouldn't a rational Republican want to try to keep this balance of deterrence, this 4-4 split on the court going? In my view, I am really skeptical that Merrick Garland is going to get a hearing or get confirmed if Hillary wants him to, if she wins and if she wants him to remain the nominee. I can see a situation where the Republicans, who still retain the right of filibuster for a Supreme Court nominee, could filibuster this thing to death and not put anybody on the court, because the stakes are really high. I mean, if you look at the number of 5-4 decisions and that in which Scalia was in a majority, or 4-4 that after he died, there are an awful lot of important issues. I won't go through them right now for the sake of time. That that the court decides, and my guess is that it's going to be very hard to get anybody on the court because of polarization. So the increase in partisan polarization also extends to other issues, as we know. We have sharper divides, even on issues that didn't used to divide the parties, but now they seem to divide partisans. So one of your readings suggested that Americans seem to think party identification is more of a social identity. It's important how they see themselves. They may take their cues from the party on issues that they're not already passionate about, and if the party takes a stance, they may simply take the same stand. On climate change, partisan polarization is growing. Now, Tesler would, while he didn't look at something like climate change, I don't think he would be surprised. It's an issue that is not associated with race, but while something like welfare at least used to be associated with race and arguably may still have some vestiges of that, Tesler's argument is that after Clinton reformed welfare, it's less, it signals less about race than it used to. But what it is an issue that, especially in Obama's second term, that Obama associated himself with. He's been trying very hard to make the United States a leader on climate change negotiations and reducing CO2 emissions. Of course, the court blocked some of his important initiatives just a couple days before Scalia died. So had Scalia died 2 days earlier, they would not have had the votes to do that. since Obama took it up, it has at least the potential to be polarizing in some of the ways that Tesler's talking about. It's associated with Obama. It's associated with something that he wants, just the way healthcare was. One of the things we learn, just finishing on climate change, and then we'll turn to the other stuff, is that neither persuasion nor education, on one hand, things that liberals love to think will work, nor personal experience with extreme weather conditions on the other, seems likely to impact the belief of climate change deniers. What happens is we talk about things like motivated cognition. There's cognitive dissonance. You resolve, if your party and other things that you believe are in one direction, you'll change your climate change views to fit with the other things. But selective acceptance of information. So you accept the information that reinforces your political identity, your political beliefs, and reject information that does not. So Tesler sees that a number of policy issues have come to be seen more positively or negatively since 2008 because racial attitudes are being primed. They cannot not be, in the sense that Obama embodies race and makes race consciousness come forward all the time, front and center. And so it spills over for Tesler into other issues that before have not been racialized because of Obama's association with them. When he talks about racial resentment, I can go over the definition if you want, but I think for the sake of time, I'll stop talking. I've talked too long. So instead of heralding a new racial order, the election of Obama actually did the opposite. It increased racial divisions, fault lines, anger, and polarization. Now, racialization did mean that some race liberals became more favorable to both Obama and his policies at the same time as racial conservatives did the opposite. So we always have to remember that there's a group of white voters who became more racially liberal because of the policies being associated with Obama. So I think I'll stop with that and let you start talking about what interested you, either in the readings or in about some of these other issues.
Thank you. Anybody who wants to talk, just look for the little button in the upper left-hand corner of your screen that says raise hand. If you click that, I will know who you are and will put you into the chat room. And then if you want to just ask a question by typing, look for the Q&A button, and then you can type there. We had one question from Bob who wants to know if we can make the charts available online after the seminar.
Sure. I have to grab them from home and give them to you, but yes.
If you email them to me, then I'll have them, and anybody who wants them can just drop a note to me, cmayer76@gmail.com. That's the same email that's in the invitation for this. You can find it there.
Sure.
And we have one request to post the recording, if that's okay with you.
If you want to. If you think
I think we do.
Go ahead.
Sure. Thank you. Okay. I'm looking for someone raising their hand.
Can you hear me, Charlie?
Absolutely, always.
I'm curious to hear from, especially folks who are tuning in who are at other schools and universities, about this thing that Tesler just mentions that Carol raised about our social identifications with political parties. And I wonder how this is manifesting itself at other in other groups of young people who are sort of coming of political age, how their social identities are correlated with their political identities, and does that ring true to people who are in the early kind of voter world? I'm sure you see it at Swarthmore, Carol.
Sorry. Well, what I was going to just add is that one of the things researchers are finding is that fewer of us actually interact in social networks with people who have political views unlike ours.
Right.
And, you know, at Swarthmore, it's still a very liberal place. There are a few Republicans in the classroom, but they're not very forthcoming this season so far. I'm not sure. I can't imagine that they are gung-ho Trump people, but we do have quite a few people who think alike.
We have a couple questions on that topic, and the questions are now rolling in Q&A style. Nobody has actually raised their hand to be added into to the video chat, but we'll see who's brave enough. I'll just take them in order. Allison Fox 80 asks, please discuss the polarization in the Republican Party, just sort of on topic for what you were just mentioning.
Do you mean within the Republican Party?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Well, one of the things that I'm not sure, it's Allison.
Yeah.
I'm not sure I have got what you're asking me, but one of the things that I think is very interesting about this election is whether the Republican Party will survive it. I think that the insurgents have captured the party, and that it's going to be very difficult for party elites or regular Republicans, whatever that means, to take it back. I think what they're going to try to do is to change the rules for delegate selection so that they can try to keep something like Trump from happening again. But I think that between the Tea Party and the Trump people, they may thwart them in that effort, in which case I really do foresee that a lot of folks will abandon what has been called the Republican Party and forge some kind of somewhat more centrist party, although I don't know what you do with the social conservatives. I don't know what you do with the economic conservatives. I don't know who's going to end up, dominating such a party, but I think it could become a new major political party, and that would sort of leave the Trump and Tea Party people, it could leave them off in the margins, or it could leave them vying for second party status if that happens. I don't know. I could see some moderate Democrats joining into a more moderate Republican Party, and the Bernie people taking the Democratic Party. Public opinion is becoming slightly more. We no longer look like a normal bell curve distribution. We see a lot more people who call themselves, quite liberal or quite conservative. So I don't know. I don't know if that's the question, though.
Let me try another one from Jeb Eddy. What do you think of the Yale 6 Americas analysis?
I haven't seen it, so maybe you should tell me.
All right, Jeb, tell us about it by raising your hand, and then I'll turn on your video. Meantime, oh, there he goes. Here he comes.
Okay. That means I'm not going to see me. I'm going to see somebody else, right?
I hope so.
Okay.
There he is.
Hey, sideways.
Oh, hang on. I got to unmute him. Let me see if I
Okay,
can.
now.
Patience with your moderator. Oh, he's unmuted.
Class of 1963, married to class of 1964, Edith Twombly, who was Assistant Dean of Admissions. And tomorrow is our 49th wedding anniversary.
Wow.
Congratulations.
Wow, great.
So
Yale, tell me a little bit about this.
Yale is doing survey work for about 7 or 8 years, and they have discovered through cluster analysis what they call 6 Americas. The smallest and richest group is called dismissive, and they are funded by the Koch brothers. And unfortunately, they're the loudest. Then there's a group called doubtful. Then there's another group called disengaged. That is the majority of my fellow MBAs from Stanford from long ago. Then there's a group called cautious. Then there's a group called concerned. And then there's probably everybody on this call alarmed. And I have found this to be a way, it's got 6 places on it instead of a simple yes, no, black, white.
Mm-hmm.
It's I ignore the people who are dismissive, the heavy deniers. I'm interested in finding people who are already cautious or concerned about global warming and seeing if I can encourage them to talk a bit, to become the next higher level up. So this sounds like it would be a really interesting assignment for a future seminar like this.
Yeah. This was especially a survey about global warming.
Yes.
Okay. I thought we were looking at some party breakdown. Okay. So.
Sorry, but it is. There's all the results are online, and there's a huge amount of polarity and so forth across party, based on party.
Right. Because most of those who are alarmed or concerned are Democrats from all the other surveys I've seen.
Yes.
Across the board. From the article that I assigned, you can see that the Democrats were much more likely not only to believe in, but to be concerned about. But it's really interesting how concern seems to vary from year to year. It seems more salient some years than others. Around 2007, there was an enormous amount of concern. And that was, not only did the film come out, but then Al Gore split the Nobel Peace Prize with the IPC folks. So it sounds like I should take a look at this survey, but it seems very hard to move people if what we're finding is correct, and that is that neither persuasion nor education nor experience with rising sea levels or anything seems to make an impact on their views, and that's that's really a tough nut to crack, I think.
Well, we got to keep trying. I'm 74 in 2 weeks. I have 4 grandsons. This is what the rest of my life's about.
I think it's really important. So.
Thanks, Jeb. Good to see you. Literally.
I will take a little bit of credit for encouraging Swarthmore College to start using Zoom. My campaign started about 2 years ago.
Okay.
Yeah, we love it. All right.
Using it. Thank you for this first trial.
You got it. All right. There I am. Hello. I don't like that. Maria asks, could some of the increasing polarization be due to a large group of people just not voting or verbalizing their positions?
If, in other words, you think that there are these people in the middle who are just not saying anything. Well, most folks who call themselves independents, and there are growing numbers of independents, lean clearly one way or the other. They vote one way or the other, and they had, in some of these studies, negative feelings toward the other party. So they're not true independents, or they're not truly neutral. One thing I've seen in some of Marcus Pryor's work, post-broadcast democracy, is that folks who are less politically engaged are also more likely to be those moderating forces in American politics. And if they're not participating, that's another reason why we get so much polarization. So, but if they're not participating, they're only contributing to polarization because they're not there, not because they are there.
Jen asks, what about the rise of independent voters, especially among the younger folks?
Yeah, well, there is a rise of independent voters, but as I said, most of them lean one way or the other. And so if you actually look at their voting behavior as best we can, because it's usually self-reported, or through exit surveys, it's still self-reported, they tend in one direction or the other. And one of the things that's so important about that Tesler Chapter 7 is that once people start voting in a particular direction, they rarely change once they have voted maybe a couple of elections. In there, they don't change anymore. So party identification is one of the most stable things we know about in terms of voting behavior. It's quite stable once it gets formed. So these independents, they may call themselves independent, but most of the time they're not going out and voting Libertarian or Green Party. They, at the end of the day, will tend to vote Democratic or Republican.
Charles Bailey, all the way from Washington State, I think.
Oh, cool.
He says, and also a member of the Alumni Council, Carol mentioned that Republicans had become more conservative to a greater degree than Democrats have become more liberal. What does this mean? How is it measured?
Well, I mean, I think we could see in some of these, you can see some in graphs like this, but you'd have to do more than this, because it sort of breaks them down by liberal and conservative. But we can see that Democrats like Al Gore, Bill Clinton, Hillary, Hillary maybe a little less so, were very anxious to push the Democratic Party toward the center. The Democratic leadership, I forget whether it's conference or council, the DLC, did help move the party away from the liberal camp between the late 80s and into the 90s. How do we measure? You can look at voting behavior in Congress, for example, or you could look at public opinion measures. Will show some of these splits between liberals and conservatives in both parties.
My classmate Sean Barney had a question that was too long for me to read, so I'm putting on his video now. There he is. Also, I just wanted to see his face. There he is.
Hi, Sean.
Oh, hang on. There's your
Mike's.
Yeah, I got it. When he enters, he's muted. Now he's unmuted. All right, man, go ahead.
Okay. Thanks so much. My question was about the influence of donors and top-down financed AstroTurf campaign. There was some mention of it in the readings. The Koch brothers were cited, and the groups behind the Tea Party. Does research suggest that donors and financiers of AstroTurf campaigns like that are more effective today or more sophisticated than they were in the past? And to the extent that they are, does research suggest that their influence pushes in the direction of greater polarization?
Yeah, well, I think I was trying to suggest that. By the way, if you're interested in this topic, maybe you have already read it. Jane Mayer's book, Dark Money, is really interesting because she gets at all sorts of things that it's really hard to find out. We know that we're living in a post-Citizens United world, and the Koch brothers, and for that matter, Karl Rove, were able to become more effective with the use of things like Rove, especially with the 501c3s and 501c4s, which are basically not supposed to be either not engaging in campaigning at all or not engaging in political activity. There's a certain percentage that I think 501c4s can do, but it's less than 50%. But it's not enforced. And so these have basically become vehicles for a lot of ideological campaign spending. And prior to 2010, it was harder to do dark money. It was harder to bundle money in such a way that it wasn't clear who gave it. And it's become much easier. So you no longer have to play with the traditional campaign finance rules at all. I mean, the usual political action committees and things like that. You can found other kinds of organizations. And the Koch brothers and allies claimed they were going to invest close to like $889 million in the 2016 election. It's just that they're not apparently investing it into the presidential race. They're pushing it in down ticket races. And frankly, it's much easier to have an effect on down ticket races where people may not be paying any attention to a ballot issue, a local or state election, and if they know the name of the candidate, that's about all they know. So it's more likely to matter there than it is, I think, at the national level. But yes, there's a lot of people say that this kind of money pushes candidates to the fore who are not representative of what most people want. And I don't know, I mean, the question is what we do about that. Rick Hasson, who came as the Constitution Day speaker this year, was not in favor of trying to do a constitutional amendment to say that money is not speech, but suggested some other ways to try to give voters some campaign money to play with, which I think Seattle has tried this in the current election cycle. I don't know if I answered the question, but sort of a long-winded one, a long-winded response from me.
Thank you. Thank you, Sean. Good to see you.
Thank you.
And there's Charles. He raised his hand, and now we see him, and hopefully we will hear him as well.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I guess it's my turn. Well, thank you, Carol. This is fascinating. I actually have two questions. My first one is, what's the evidence that knowing who gave money actually influences electoral outcomes? If we knew who donated after Koch brothers or others, would it really make a difference?
Why don't you ask both questions, and then I'll see if
Okay.
they're not related. Are they not related?
They're not related.
Oh, okay, then let me try this. Transparency is not necessarily going to make everything all better. It would be nice to have it so that we know who's funding what, but it doesn't stop them, and it may not change anybody else's voting behavior. We know that we don't think elections are bought. Political scientists don't think that money buys a vote, for example. But what this kind of money can do, and I suppose worse if it's dark money, is that the kinds of candidates who get into office are the kinds of candidates who already think like, anti-regulation. I did mention the case of Romney changing his views on climate change to try to get me. There are plenty of other examples in Mayer's book that may be even more stark than that. But it changes the composition of the legislature. And that in and of itself will change the kind of legislation you get without anybody being bought. So that's sort of the problem. If it takes a lot of money to get elected, average citizens really don't have that kind of leverage. And there are also some really interesting studies by people like Larry Bartels and Benjamin Page with Martin Gilens that say they've looked at legislative action on certain issues. Page and Gilens did 1,179 issues and said that it is very clear that business interests get listened to, and that average people and mass-based organizations don't. So there is some evidence that legislative outcomes respond more to upper-income Americans, whether donors or no. So that's the best I can do with question one.
Okay, my second question is, you mentioned the possible falling apart of the Republican Party. Mm-hmm. What is the real difference between Trump supporters and Tea Party followers? Do they see themselves as distinct? Are they distinct in some sociological or, electoral sense?
Right. I'm only going to be, this is going to be a little tough. Well, look, the Tea Party voters, I mean, some Christian conservatives are with the Tea Party. They are not coextensive, of course. Tea Party groups actually differ quite a lot from one locale to another, and some of them resist coordination too. So I don't think there's any sort of Tea Party platform that we can talk about, but it is this anger against big government. There is an anger against people who they see as takers, undeserving. The Tea Party is disproportionately white, and so is Trump support. Trump support is probably more male. I mean, the Tea Party actually is more male than female, but Trump supporters, I think, is much more heavily male than the Tea Party alone. I think that's going to take some time. I don't think we can sort this out until after, election data is in. But I just have to confess that, Trump has certainly been playing to some Tea Party themes, and I don't know, apart from this just sort of anger at government and the desire to preserve the way of life of white middle-class Americans, because Tea Party people are not poor. That probably resonate. They probably resonate to some extent with Trump's position.
Oops, hang on, Charles. Let me unmute you. Okay. Oh, there he goes. There he goes. Okay.
Yeah. I guess the last thing I want to say is that it takes time to. We can't. Some of this stuff is going to have to be digested after the election, not before the election, when we actually see who votes how. It'll take some time. Political scientists, try to do a lot of analysis on the fly, but sometimes we have to sit with the data quite a while before we know what really went on.
That's
Great.
what CNN is for, right? For the day-to-day.
Right. No. One
Go
more
ahead.
thing.
Yep.
I'd just like to say today I got the Washington State voter.
That's cool to see. Yeah.
And on two initiatives. One is to instruct our congressional delegation to support a constitutional amendment that would change, it would make free speech be that of human beings, not corporations.
Uh-huh.
And the other, I think, is the first carbon emissions tax in the country.
Ah.
So you can watch this space.
And you guys have all mail-in votes too. Right?
That's right. And
one of 3 states that has that.
that's right. It's sort of too bad because it was kind of a social occasion always to go and get in line at the polls and see who else is there and so forth, all of that. Our congressional delegation is entirely women, just to match that. Our 2 senators and my congresswoman.
Interesting. Yeah.
Anyway, that's Washington State.
Yeah, I know that Oregon claims that participation is up because of mail-in ballots, but I was reading an article the other day that suggested that the evidence is much more mixed, and that participation goes up when the novelty effect is still high, and then it seems to settle down. So we'll see what happens. But I think it's neat. I think it's a neat thing to do.
Right.
Thanks, Charles. It's
Thank
great
you.
to see you. We're going to see you next month.
Indeed. Thanks for arranging this.
You got it. Okay, Bob Eaton, 65. It seems clear that a significant section of the GOP, those who nominated Trump, no longer pledge allegiance to GOP verities, e.g. cutting or privatizing Social Security. Is there a major realignment underway?
So I think that is possible. I don't know whether that question came in before I commented on what I think is going on. I will also say, and this also speaks, I think, to the question about the Tea Party and Trump. Tea Party folks support Social Security too and Medicare. They don't want to lose those government benefits. So Theda Skocpol and Vanessa Williamson's book on the Tea Party says that they're not trying to get rid of the government benefits that benefit them, only the government benefits that go to people they see as undeserving. I do think there is a real possibility we're going to see a realignment, or at least the breakdown of one of the two major parties. I'm not sure how healthy the Democratic Party is, but it's not quite ready to implode tomorrow. I think I would not be surprised if 2020 you've got at least another party in the race with either the disaffected folks who won't support Trump, who have been the party elites, or if they're able to take the Republican Party back, the third party would be the Trump people. And I don't think Trump is going away. I don't think the anger, I don't think the issues are going to go away at all. So the Republican Party has been a composition of a lot of different forces, ranging from business interests that may be more internationalist to now we've got all this sort of, the nation first, Trump people and the folks who are really angry about free trade. And there's some MIT economists that think that maybe economists who kept saying that free trade works, are missing something when they look at those folks who actually are in positions that compete with the Chinese or compete with somebody else. So yeah, I do think that's one of the things that in my longer talk that I've been giving, I think political scientists really need to be paying some attention to, because I think it's very possible the Republican Party will fall apart and we are looking at some kind of realignment.
We'll see you again in 4 years to talk about that, if not before. We have two more questions that I'd like to get to, and then aim to stop towards the top of the hour so we can catch up with baseball. The Nationals are up, by the way, 1-0 in the bottom.
Oh, goody.
But kind of following on your last point, Jen asks, the polarization continues. It continues to increase. What will this mean for our government going forward? Will there be a resolution? What might it look like? And I think if I had to synthesize what you just said, it'll get noisier.
Yeah. Well, I'm not an optimist here. And one of the reasons I'm not an optimist is I said there were a lot of reasons for polarization, but one reason for polarization is economic inequality. And Thomas Piketty in that 2013 book, Capital, claims to find evidence that growing economic inequality is linked to political instability. And frankly, I think there's some plausible hypothesis that we're seeing some of that. So part of the anger is about economic inequality. I don't know how that works when Trump says he's smart not to pay federal income taxes, and that he's somehow going to fix it if he's president, so that people can't take advantage of the laws that let him do what he does. But I do think that there is no immediate fix for polarization. Unless we can solve some of the fairly macro economic problems facing this nation and the economic inequality stuff, and make people feel that they've got some kind of hope for a stable and stable, good jobs. It's not likely that we're going to end polarization anytime soon.
And the last question comes from Asus1, which must be a computer, but I'm sure is also a Swarthmore alum. The question is, in places where we have non-party-based primaries, so an open primary and the top 2 vote getters move to the general election, is there evidence that it works to fight intense polarization?
I don't know if anybody's looked at that. Why is Lucy laughing?
I think she saw it.
That Charlie runs the tech end of this undertaking.
She's laughing not at you.
Okay.
Not at you at all.
And not even the question, which is a good question and not that funny, but a good question.
It is a good question. I mean, I don't know of any studies that have looked at variation in who can vote in the primaries. We've got same-day registration. We've got open primaries. We've got, the ones with the usual 30 days and all the identifications. And does that make any difference in terms of part of the reason it would be very hard to disentangle is the state political culture is in of itself part of the reason why you have open primaries. So, or partisan and closed primaries. So I don't know how you would sort out that factor from the outcomes of the votes, but it's an interesting question. I've never seen anything done on it.
Well, thank you so much, Carol. It's great to see you. What a treat! And
fun.
And we had about we've had about 30 people consistently for the whole hour. So I think we demonstrated that we can hold an audience. So thanks to you. Thanks to Lisa Schaefer for making it all work. Lisa is there.
Thanks, Charlie. Thanks, Lisa. Thanks, Lucy.
She's hidden herself. And thanks to my, there she is.
Room. Oh, there we go.
And thanks to my co-conspirator, Lucy Lang. This was a lot of fun. And we'll see you all again next Thursday. Lucy, do you want to promote it?
Next Thursdays?
Yeah. Isn't it next Thursday?
It is next Thursday. It's the next 2 Thursdays with an option for a 4th Thursday, the following, which we'll talk more about. Next week, we will be joined by Ben Berger, and he has recommended 2 books by Swarthmore alums, both of which tell accounts across the economic spectrum. And I don't have handy the name of his talk, but I think it's going to be super engaging. And the books are very readable, and I recommend that you pick them up if you want us to target specific, to tell you the best chapters because you don't think you can read the whole thing, then just shoot me an email and we will refer you to specific areas of the books. But insofar as you can, try to read them both. They're by alums and it's going to be a great conversation.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.